This is Why Small Business Matters from Northumbria University, supporting small businesses with the Help to Grow management programme.
Hello and welcome to Why Small Business Matters. I'm Sarah Stephenson and I'm part of the Help to Grow management team at Northumbria University. Today on Why Small Business Matters, we're going to be talking about sustainability and net zero, two terms that are often bandied around that we hear frequently in the press and media. Today I'm talking to Tamma Carel, founder and owner of two businesses, Imvelo, an environmental consultancy. Imvelo provides training to UK businesses to meet the United Nations sustainability goals. And more recently, iCOR, an environmental compliance platform. Tamma is also an associate lecturer at Northumbria University, and she's an advocate of women and girls in STEM. Great to have you here today. So tell me a little bit about how you were drawn to become an active campaigner and a business owner.
Oh, well, quite a long journey. I think I've always known I was going to work in the environmental sector in some way, shape or form. I started in kind of grassroots conservation. I have a genuine love of nature and a genuine desire to protect it. So I think I knew from a really young age that the only way I was ever going to be able to work in a sector that, sought to protect the environment, I was going to have to take a STEM route in order to be able to get there. My love is kind of founded in biology. So that was, a subject I did at my A-levels and then carried on to university. My first degree was a joint honours in biology and psychology. And that was very much a point where I think I understood, but didn't really understand that actually in order to make a career out of sustainability, it was people and planet. And there were a lot of components of that psychology degree that I find fascinatingly keep popping up, now in terms of real life application and how it complemented that biological stream. Coming out of that degree, I still wasn't entirely sure how I was going to forge a career out of it. So I went back and did a master's in environmental management, and that was an MSc. And definitely the nature of my work is very founded in science. It's using real world data, adapting with climate science, which is continuously changing the more we understand about the impact that we have on the planet, and eventually got to a point where I understood the type of work that I wanted to do. But at the time that I was looking, there weren't actually many jobs going specifically in that. So that was a bit of an educated punt on myself, like, let's just see if I can actually, form a business out of this and go out into the world and do the work that I want to do, and see whether there's a market for it, whether businesses will buy into it, whether I can achieve what I'm trying to achieve. And, really delighted to say that has worked out so far. And Imvelo and iCOR subsequently, we found niche little pockets in the marketplace that businesses have very specific questions around environmental management and sustainability, and they're looking for that guidance and they're looking for the science actually to be able to help them make better business decisions with regards to climate action or mitigating the consequences of climate change. The nature of the work that I do in the industries that I work in, I very quickly realized that I was definitely in a minority, as a woman in these fields. That personally has never really fussed me. I don't particularly get intimidated walking into a room of men, but very acutely aware that actually representation is very much lacking. And then realized that I was in a unique position to demonstrate to other women that actually this is a place that you can be. It looks intimidating from the outside, but the reality is that once you get in there, you're kind of equally capable of thriving, and there are equal opportunities, and there's multiple opportunities that are really very exciting. And the truth is that progress towards real sustainability does require diverse schools of thought and, diversity and inclusion and different perspectives to really try and solve real world problems.
So let's talk a little bit about Imvelo. What do you provide to small businesses and larger businesses?
Absolutely. So Imvelo is an environmental consultancy and training. So, at a surface level, those are the services that we offer. The consultancy packages that we deliver are founded in international frameworks for environmental management. So there's a number that businesses might have heard of. Things like ISO 14001, which is the International Framework for Environmental Management, but also, ESG as a concept which is moving forward, carbon management, carbon footprinting, all of these words around how businesses can be more responsible for the environment are fundamentally founded in international frameworks that seek to standardize approaches. So at least when we're making progress towards sustainability, we're all kind of singing from the same hymn sheet as much as is possible. So I use those traditional frameworks, which businesses are quite comfortable with because they're written for businesses. They probably have heard of them. They're definitely being asked for them when they're, tendering for work or applying for projects or, meeting kind of regulatory requirements. But what makes Imvelo unique is that we then use those traditional frameworks, but integrate the sustainable development goals into the heart of it. So whilst we're focusing on environmental management foundationally, it provides a really great opportunity to expand into the bigger piece of sustainability, which is triple bottom line. It's people, planet, and profit, all supporting each other, all equal and equitable. A big part of delivering that consultancy comes with the training as well, because I feel quite strongly that the biggest barrier to sustainability remains education, understanding, and awareness. I think there's a lot of words that exist and they're quite confusing. And really, it's about bringing it back down to the science of climate change and where the problems are in terms of targeting your solutions so that they actually bring about a meaningful benefit for the organization. So that training offering is my passion, and the way that we deliver consultancy services is very much a mentoring, collaborative, engagement, knowledge exchange kind of process. Because at the end of the day, I feel if I do my job well, then a business shouldn't need me beyond a certain point. They can actually take ownership of that sustainability strategy. Obviously, we hope that they still want us, we can provide value, but they shouldn't need us. And that is a critical point for me and something I feel quite strongly about.
So for those people listening who perhaps aren't involved in this at the moment, maybe they're not running a business, but they're interested in this in general terms, can you define what net zero really means? I mean, we hear it all the time on the press. We hear that we all have to aim for it. But recently, scientists have said, actually, we've got to bring that date forward. We can't wait any longer. Can you define that for our listeners?
Absolutely. It is quite complicated. Fundamentally, net zero is compared to a baseline. So we're looking at a different point in time, which the government has predetermined, that says when we were emitting carbon at this point in time, that is the level that we want to get back to. So we don't want to create any more carbon than was created at this point in time. And the journey towards net zero is essentially reducing the amount of carbon that we create to get back to that line in the sand where they've established a net zero benchmark is. What it is essentially is a reduction in creating carbon. You stop creating carbon, and that is how we achieve net zero. But as you say, it often gets confused with some of the other words around carbon management. And I think the biggest trap I see businesses falling into is the difference between net zero, which is a carbon reduction, and absolute carbon reduction versus offsetting, which is, okay, we know how much carbon we produce and we're going to plant some trees to compensate for that. So yeah, the big difference there is it's an absolute reduction, but with the caveat that it is against a baseline that is predetermined in time. So it's not absolute zero.
Talking about offsetting, so we all know that really if we're going to travel to Australia, for example, we should really be offsetting our travel. For business, how do they offset in reality, and what does that really mean for carbon reduction?
In terms of carbon management, we tend to work along a structure called the carbon reduction hierarchy, which, again, you've probably seen or heard in a number of different ways. Sometimes it's called the resource efficiency hierarchy, sometimes it's called the energy hierarchy. And in fact, we even see it in UK legislation in some ways for stuff called like the waste management hierarchy. And essentially, it's a pyramid that goes through the choices that you should make when you're trying to figure out how to do better. And it is quite succinctly summarized as the 3 R's. You seek to reduce, you reuse, and then you recycle. Offsetting comes at the very bottom of that pyramid. So for organizations who are looking to reduce their carbon footprint, they should be focusing on areas for reduction as a priority. So that flight to Australia, how business critical is it? If you do have to fly, there's a difference in your footprint whether you fly first class, business class, or economy class. There are ways to choose your routes so that you've not got multiple stops, because with an aeroplane, the biggest carbon impact is actually during takeoff. So are there more direct routes? But really, that's the reduce, the reuse, the kind of change the approach of how you do that. But the first question should be, do we have to? Because if we don't fly, then there's no carbon emissions as a result of that. All of the international frameworks strive to work you down this hierarchy, and offsetting is the absolute last step in that process, because offsetting alone could never compensate for the volume of carbon that we are producing. So it's lovely, and I fully advocate plant as many trees as you want. They're good for nature, they're good for us, they're good for health and well-being, but we should not be depending on planting trees today to kind of make up for all of the carbon that we're producing through our activities and operations.
Tell me a little bit about iCOR, because this is your platform, isn't it? That really businesses really going to have to pay more attention to what they're doing.
iCOR is very exciting, and I do get a bit geeked out by it. But essentially, in going through the international frameworks for environmental management, in order to determine where you have opportunities to do better for the environment, it asks you to go through quite a rigorous assessment of actually where you are in the world right now and what is materially relevant to your activities in terms of environmental protection. And one of the processes that you go through to identify what is relevant to your activity is to determine which laws apply to your activities. In the UK, we have over 250 pieces of environmental legislation. That's specific environmental legislation, but there is actually also a really strong overlap between some of the health and safety regulations that exist, because fundamentally, if we're protecting the environment, we're also protecting human health and well-being. And the truth is that is actually really difficult for businesses to know or understand. There isn't really a single place that you can go to that helps keep on top of all of this legislation. And the reality of legislation is it changes with science. So where we understand the impact that we're having on the environment, the more data we get around that particular impact, the legislation is likely to change to meet what we understand about the science. In order for the government to actually achieve their own net zero target, the only mechanism that they have is going to be the regulatory framework in order to drive that through businesses. And although we're talking about carbon, which I think most people, we think of it like air, it's just the stuff that emits invisibly into the environment. That's not true. Every part of the environment has a potential carbon footprint and a potential environmental impact. And regulation exists to protect the whole environment. So you're looking at the stuff that you buy, the chemicals that you use, the waste that you produce, the water that you use, the water that you produce, emissions to air, protection for biodiversity, species, habitats, the stuff that you build and create and how that gets dealt with at the end of life. Every single one of those elements has a carbon impact, has a carbon footprint, but also has existing regulation around it that is just going to get more stringent as we progress towards net zero. So we set about creating a platform that allowed organizations to much more easily understand which laws apply to their specific activities, And that's quite a nuance as well for small businesses that are growing. So, depending on what you do, you could do an assessment today and, certain laws don't apply. But once you hit particular thresholds, then that regulation comes into scope and there's probably something that you're going to have to do about it. And the risk for businesses is not knowing that, not knowing that there's a particular law that applies. And the consequence of not complying with legislation is that you could inadvertently be causing pollution to the environment, causing harm to the environment. And that then opens your business up to risk that you could be prosecuted, fined, the reputational damage and impacts on business as usual, which obviously none of us would want. So the idea is it takes businesses through an intelligent audit. You just answer questions about what your business does, and then it helps you identify your strengths and weaknesses in terms of compliance. And where there are potential risks, it helps develop strategies that you can then take forward to be able to do better. Once you know that you're basically compliant, because this is just the law, it applies to everybody, but once you know what parts of the environment are protected relevant to your activities, you're also going to have all of the headlines of where you can do better. So if water, waste, air, land came up as, right, we've got laws that we have to apply with, then we also know that those are the areas that you can focus on for ultimate improvement, going above and beyond legislation. But it helps as a decent starting point, to really understand, like I said, what's materially relevant to the organization.
So it all sounds fairly restrictive, doesn't it, for a business at the moment? They've got to comply with this 250 pieces of environmental legislation to comply with. But we know that if businesses can follow these principles, these net zero principles, it can benefit the business in the long term. Have you got some case studies you can share with us, some examples of best practice?
Well, for a lot of organizations, a priority focus on doing better for the environment is founded in concepts of resource efficiency. So, the big piece of sustainability is we are operating on a finite planet, and the resources that we have available are being depleted, and we are creating more waste than this planet is able to absorb or cope with. Once you start looking at, okay, so how can we be more responsible, more efficient with the resources, the natural resources that we're, processing through our organization, you find that you get more efficient with those, which has a genuine environmental impact, carbon reduction as a consequence. But we also see that it tends to have a financial benefit for the business because you're not wasting money. You're not buying stuff that you don't need. Your process has become more efficient. So the wastes that occur at the end of that reduce, which I always think is quite interesting. Waste management is a particular area of the environment that I enjoy. I do enjoy it. Not many people do, but it's really interesting because if you think about what's being thrown away, it really raises a lot of questions about what are you buying in the first place? Like, why are you buying that? And what are you doing with it in an inefficient way that is creating this volume of waste that you then also have to pay to get rid of? So everything that goes in your bin in an organizational context, you've paid for twice. You've paid to buy it, well, 3 times actually. You paid to process it, and then you're paying to throw it away at the end of the line. Where I find it really exciting is, obviously I work with a number of different businesses, a number of different sectors, and each sector kind of has its own challenges. But when you start on this journey of resource efficiency and you get different people within an organization involved in the conversation, what I love is like the shift change in culture. And it's really interesting to see that journey happen. The first sessions I tend to run with organizations, they're sitting there, they're a little bit intimidated. It's a lot of information because I have to educate on sustainability first before we can go into, okay, but what does it actually mean to you as an organization? But I try really hard to draw out parts of it so that each person can walk away feeling empowered, that they know what they can do in their specific job function to be able to support the bigger piece. But what gets really exciting is that, people start to take ownership and they get quite excited, and actually collaboration and partnerships ensue. So one department is like, we can't do this alone. We need to go and talk to that department, and you get just better teams as a result of it. And definitely people want to do something that they feel passionate about. And a lot of people feel very passionately about sustainability, even if it's not, the tree hugging type of sustainability. They just know at a broad level, we want to leave the world better off, by the time we're finished doing what we want to do. And that behavioral change and that, movement. And then for organizations, like I say, they're saving money, they've got a more engaged workforce, but the more that they're able to demonstrate towards sustainability then also enhances their future recruitment. I'm seeing people getting reduced insurance quotes, because they've got better foresight, better overview of their compliance status. They're able to access funding and investment much more easily. So it comes back to that triple bottom line, people, plan, and profit. If you focus on developing all of those areas in tandem, then it brings a multitude of benefits for organizations.
You're listening to Why Small Business Matters. Find out how Northumbria University can help your business thrive through the Help to Grow management program, delivered by leading small business and enterprise experts from Northumbria University, with the support of leading figures from industry and experienced entrepreneurs. The program supports senior managers of small and medium-sized businesses to boost their business's performance, resilience, and long-term growth. The 12-week program is 90% funded by the government, and the fee payable by participants is £750, and has been designed to allow participants to complete it alongside full-time work. The in-depth, high-quality curriculum supports you to build your capabilities in leadership, innovation, digital adoption, employee engagement, marketing, responsible business, and financial management. By the end of the program, you'll develop a business growth plan to help you lead your business to realize its potential. To find out more about the program, the modules, eligibility, and fees and delivery dates, go to northumbria.ac.uk/help-to-grow.
Listening to Why Small Business Matters. I'm Sarah Stephenson, and today I'm talking to Tamma Carel, founder and owner of Imvelo and iCOR, an environmental consultancy and compliance platform. There have been some recent studies, haven't there? Particularly, there was one by Deloitte that's shown that 55% of consumers will choose food and non-alcoholic beverage brands that have environmentally sustainable values and practices. So there's a real big impetus there, isn't it, as consumers for us? I know we have a cost of living crisis at the moment, but I think most of us are prepared to pay a little bit extra if it means that we know that those products are more sustainable.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely, a shift in the will in the marketplace and consumer expectations. And I do think COVID had a lot to do with this. Suddenly when the world stopped and we saw that actually when the world stopped, nature started to thrive, a little bit more, and we were stuck in our local communities, and that made, that 1 hour a day when you were outside, and you suddenly started to really value the nature that was on your doorstep. And we had time to think about what we could do to positively affect that, or what different choices that we could make. I agree that generally consumers are demanding more from businesses, and therefore the risk again for businesses is if you're not thinking about it and you're not anticipating what your customers are going to be asking for, then you are undermining your ability to thrive, to be a sustainable organization. Because if not now, it's only a matter of time that those demands are going to come through. I think the flip side of that, it is still very difficult for consumers to really know that the choices that they're making are the right choices. And it is, again, because of the language that is used around this. What does a carbon neutral drink actually mean? Or is it carbon neutral? Is it just the drink, or was it the whole manufacturing process? If you're looking at different kind of, you want to buy coffee, for example, and you've got coffee that's fair trade, which is a social stamp, or one that's Rainforest Alliance, which is an environmental stamp. Like, how do you actually compare those two? Because they're different parts of sustainability and both equally important, but it's not a like-for-like comparison, for example. And again, I can see this event at the moment. The words around sustainability are not regulated, but interestingly, not from a environmental legislation perspective, but from the marketing regulations that are coming through. We've seen guidelines come out in terms of how businesses communicate about their environmental performance. Trading Standards is proactively pursuing businesses who are claiming net zero to verify that that is in fact an accurate claim. And there's some legislation coming through about competition and markets, the CMA Competition Markets Authority, in terms of how businesses collaborate to achieve sustainability. So I find that very interesting, because now actually you're talking about marketing and you can see environmental regulation coming in there in terms of what businesses can and can't say about their environmental performance. What it fundamentally comes down to is it says their claims should be scientifically accurate.
Definitely. I was about to ask you, what role do you think government should play in this? But it sounds as though, they are making efforts to try and understand really the terms and make sure that those businesses who have made those claims, that they are in fact
that they are true and accurate. That's the only expectation. Just tell the truth. That's all we want from businesses.
So we've talked a bit about business and the role you can play with them to help them understand their requirements, but also how they can really, really help to meet these standards. But also, what can we do as individuals?
I really think the biggest thing that we can do is challenge the stuff that we buy. And it all sits in that reduce element of the resource efficiency hierarchy. Not so much like where it comes from, obviously seeking, environmental accreditation, something that verifies that it's a responsible product. But I've definitely been on a bit of a personal journey over the last few years in terms of the stuff I think I need. And actually, about 80% of the stuff I thought I need, I actually don't. So eliminating that, just stop consuming. And then the stuff that you do need, then seek to, get stuff that is credible, that is reliable, that is responsible towards the environment, and ideally regenerative towards the environment, although that in itself is a constantly evolving science and relatively new. So we're also just trying to figure out what that means. There are the headlines, there's a lot of information out there in terms of what people can do personally, thinking about your travel, the choices you make. Again, do I need to make this journey, is a really the best thing you can do. And if I do need to make this journey, what is the most efficient and responsible way that I can do that? Reducing, meat consumption. And I'm not, I don't even advocate for perfect vegetarianism or veganism. It's just a reduction, just really critiquing the choices that you make. But then also, this is carbon footprinting that we tend to think about, what reduces carbon emissions. But I also come back to waste. So if I'm buying something, I always ask myself, how am I going to throw this away when I'm finished with it? And if it can't be reused or recycled, I will try to find an alternative, product that might be able to do that. And the waste, the microplastics, the impacts on the ocean, the other stuff that we're so familiar with in terms of the impact that we have on the environment, is not considered carbon. Typically, it sits in scope 3 of carbon, so it's often not measured in corporate carbon footprints, but it is in itself a significant impact on the environment.
And how do businesses in the UK compare to our competitors around the world in terms of reaching these goals?
Nobody's doing great right now. Nobody's doing great. The most recent COP meeting, Conference of the Parties, which is designed to review how each country that committed to the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, and that was a global commitment that each country would try to implement regulation to ultimately ensure that global warming does not exceed 1.5 degrees centigrade. And that, understandably requires a globally collective effort to actually achieve that. The last COP conference concluded that pretty much nobody had got to where they were going to be, and the probability of us staying below 1.5 is really slipping away from us. We've got a really, in fact, they say within the next 7 years, by 2030, if we haven't seen significant reduction, we're talking anywhere between 50 to 70% reduction, stopping, not producing carbon. That's going to bring us back into line. But that's quite difficult to rationalize against development, in a growing population and the needs that people have for schools and houses and roads and infrastructure, and all of that building and development is inherently carbon heavy. So it's difficult. But I do fundamentally believe we still could, with a concerted effort, we absolutely still could.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your role in STEM. We often hear about trying to encourage more women, more girls to take up those subjects at school and possibly at university, and really encourage them to look at those subjects about starting a business or perhaps going to work for those businesses. How does that link with your interest and your campaign around environmental sustainability and so on?
I genuinely believe that sustainability and the progress towards it requires multiple perspectives. We always think about kind of cost and benefit. So if we do this action, what would the cost be and what would the benefit be? But if we take a global perspective, the costs and benefits, from England to South Africa, for example, where I'm originally from, they're literally not the same, so you need to know, well, if we do this action in England, actually, what would the consequence be in South Africa or another developing country or another first world country? And really, what does that cost benefit really, really look like? A lot of the people that I know working in environmental management and working in sustainability are, in fact, women. And I think that does have a little bit to do with, kind of a nurturing approach to this planet, Mother Nature, and wanting to protect her, and understanding the value of life. And I think, a female perspective when we make decisions about sustainability is incredibly, incredibly valuable. And, honestly, just all diversity and equality, like the more people at the table, the more perspectives at the table, the better the solutions will be. And I believe that wholeheartedly. And actually, so does the United Nations, because out of the Sustainable Development Goals, the final goal, Goal 17, is partnerships for sustainability, this inherent understanding that absolutely no single person, organization, or government could come up with all of these solutions on their own, because you just don't know what it's like to live in someone else's shoes for a day. And that's fact. I think when I was growing up, nobody told me I could do this job because this job didn't exist. But my scientific background, and I'm not an engineer. I completely honestly kind of muddled my way through A-level biology. I didn't perform particularly well, at that level. Muddled my way through university a little bit. I'm kind of actually not a natural academic, but it was a love of a subject that kind of pushed me through. And, even now I'm so far away from university, like that rigor, that scientific rigor, that critiquing the information that's getting to you, that's challenging it, that asking for proof is really the fundamental skills that allow me to be good at the job that I do. I think the way that girls are engaged in STEM subjects, so this I think goes way further back, not at a point where people are deciding what jobs they do. It's really when they're in school, and kind of that pre-GCSE age, when before you start narrowing down your options, you study all your subjects and then you have to narrow down. And I think that's the point where young girls just need to see that these are careers and options and opportunities that are available to them if they want it. I think as a 11-year-old girl, if you're looking at a boardroom full of men, it's really scary. You don't see yourself there because there's no one there that looks like you. So that's it. I feel what I can do is I can be visible, and I can be vocal about the places that I work, and I can just try and reach as many girls as possible to say, if you want it, Like, it's yours. Just come and take it. There's literally nothing stopping in your way.
I love your enthusiasm. To finish, Tamma, I'd just like to go back to business and think about one thing perhaps that you would say a small business listening to you today, thinking about their own emissions, how they're going to meet some of this legislation going forward. What one thing should they start thinking about today?
I think the thing to think about is the words that you intend to use when you communicate about your environmental performance. So if you want to be able to put on your website, we are net zero, I think it's really just important that you understand what that word means, for you and for your organization, academically, scientifically. Just make sure that the promises that you're putting out, you can validate. And then it is about the proof. So you've got a commitment to net zero. As a consultant, as an auditor, if I was sitting in front of you, the first thing I would say is, well, can you show me what you've done so far? Can you show me how you plan to get there? So your promises should be backed up, and the words that you use should be words that you understand and can verify. And that can be any part of the environment, any part of sustainability. So even if you're a very socially oriented business or a very environmentally oriented business, if you're working positively in any of those spheres, it's having, subsequent benefits for other areas of sustainability. But I think the promises you make are important. Just know what you're committing to.
Tamma, thank you so much. It's been an education listening to you today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again to today's guest, Tamma Carel. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, why not listen to some of the other subjects we've covered, such as engagement, mental health and business, and university collaboration. If you'd like to find out more about how Northumbria University can help your business, go to northumbria.ac.uk/help to grow.